Good morning. So when I was in college, as some of you know, I was an English major. I got an English degree. And one of the classes I had to take in college was a class on ancient Greek literature. Sounds thrilling, I know. And the professor, who was a Greek scholar, demanded that we dabble in translating some ancient Greek to English. And why this is of importance to us as Christians is we all know that the Gospels were originally in ancient Greek and have been translated into English. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I learned in that class and share it with you. And the first thing, and this is really the most important thing I want you guys to remember about translating ancient languages, is that translating ancient Greek into English is about as thrilling as root canal work. All right? It's incredibly difficult. Okay, it's like trying to do calculus while simultaneously doing a handstand, all right? I can do neither of those. So you can imagine how well I did in this class, okay? In fact, at the end, my advisor came up to me and she said, would you like to continue with ancient Greek or would you like to switch to something like Shakespeare? And I said, I'll take Shakespeare, please, okay? And I know some of you are like, is that really an upgrade? Is that better than ancient Greek? But let me tell you, when Juliet stands at that balcony and she says, Romeo, oh Romeo, where art thou, my Romeo? No translation is necessary. I know exactly what that girl wants in her life. She's not sending out any mixed signals, all right? Here's the problem with translating ancient Greek into English, okay? And this is incredibly important. You cannot achieve a precise word-to-word translation. It's not like you can just break open the Greek dictionary and the English dictionary and say, okay, here's this word, here's this word. It doesn't work that way. It's different sentence structure, different syntax, different grammar. It's all different, okay? So when you have to go and actually translate this stuff, say translate the Gospels into English so we can have, the text we hold in our hands today, scholars have to do a lot of interpretation. They have to sit down and say, okay, what is the message that Jesus is trying to deliver here, and how can I put that into English, okay? There's a lot of what we call textual criticism being done here. Now, our detractors of our faith love this. They love to latch onto this and say, well, you don't know if that's really the words of God, right? Because it's a translation. Baloney. Baloney. Something I learned in that class is that the Gospels, that particular translation, is the most accurate English translation from ancient Greek in the world, in the history of mankind. All right, because thousands of really smart people who can do calculus while also doing a handstand have put a lot of effort into making sure that what you hold in your hands is the most accurate translation possible. Okay, they've taken the time, and what they've prioritized is the message, the moral and ethical teachings that Jesus says, the words that he says. They've taken the time to make sure that what you read is as accurate as it possibly can be, all right? Now, of course, we've also all heard the phrase lost in translation. And so some of you might say, well, was anything lost? And yes, some things were left out in the translation. What were these things? Well, when you read gospel, I'm sure you've all noticed a lot of times it says, like Jesus said, he said, she said, right? But there's never any indication of like how they said it or the tone of voice they used, right? Well, you'll find if you look at the Greek text, it's in there, okay? It indicates how particular people in these gospel scenes actually said a verse, all right? So maybe somebody smiled, all right? Or maybe somebody chuckled, or maybe somebody was really stern. It will say that in the Greek, and you're saying, well, why would they leave that out? Why would they not put that in, all right? Well, think about if you say somebody smiles. A lot of different types of smiles, right? You can have a big smile, you could have a little smile, you could have a nervous smile, you could even have that fake smile you use at the employee Christmas party when you're talking to that coworker you don't particularly enjoy. There's a lot of different types of smiles. And translators, when they're doing this, realize, wait a minute, there's a lot of ambiguity here. This could make people uncertain about this text. All right, and so they say, well, I'm going to leave that out. I'm just going to go neutral. I don't want to introduce ambiguity and doubt into the gospel reading. So they say, we're just going to go with something neutral, something like he said, she said, and we'll leave it up to you, the reader, to infer how that particular verse is delivered. All right, that's what gets left out, those little emotional descriptors that are in our gospels. All right. Does that matter? Well, I think that's sort of a personal choice. I think of it like seasoning on food, okay? Think about when you season food, right? It adds taste and flavor. And so those little descriptors, those little emotional catchwords, like he smiled, he chuckled, right? He was stern, he was angry, he was sad. It's like seasoning on food. Does it matter? No, the food will still fill you up. It just lacks sometimes taste. That's why sometimes our gospels can be a bit dry, okay? It says he said, she said, Jesus said. All right, Amanda and I, as most of you know, we've been in the hospital over the last 2 weeks, and we have enjoyed the culinary expertise of the WellSpan dining facility. All right, and I think of it, we were sitting at lunch once, and I was having the chicken salad, and she was having the tuna salad, and we looked at each other and said, you know, it's not that bad. The hospital food really is not that bad. Here's the problem with it. It's bland, right? It doesn't have a lot of taste. They don't season it. They don't put any salt on it. They don't put any butter on anything, okay, for health reasons. So while it's good, it fills your stomach, it provides sustenance and nourishment, it just doesn't have any taste. It lacks seasoning. Or think of it another way with the gospel. Think of it like a cheeseburger, right? The Greek version has it's a cheeseburger with the lettuce, the tomato, the mayonnaise, the onions, and the pickles. Well, when they translated it into English, they sometimes, because they were worried, they scrape the mayonnaise off and the lettuce and tomato, and they give you a burger with, plain burger on a bun. All right? Again, it doesn't change the message. That's the key. The words of Jesus Christ are absolutely accurate. You just don't have all those toppings and those seasonings and that salt on it, okay? I want to do is take this gospel, and I'm going to show you a couple points, and we're going to put that seasoning from the Greek version back on, okay? And maybe you'll see, hey, I like that. Maybe it adds to my understanding of this gospel lesson, or maybe it doesn't matter to me, okay? You can be the judge, okay? This gospel for me, it's about three things, one of which you wouldn't know unless you read the Greek version, but the two things that are evident to us in the English, it's about joy for me and reconciliation. Those are major themes in this, okay? You have to put this thing in perspective of the Easter story. It's sort of at the tail end. We went through the goodbyes of the Last Supper, and then the horror and the torture and the death of the crucifixion, and then we had that quiet joy of the resurrection, right, when we realized it was going to be okay. Then Jesus reveals himself to his disciples. They know he's come back. He's returned. He's beat death. And now the disciples have had this period of time where they're like, what do we do next? And all of us who have gone through a traumatic event in our life, which the crucifixion was certainly traumatic, all right, we get to that point where we say, okay, what's next? What is next? And of course, they're a little bit confused. And so like all of us, when we're confused, we go back to what we know. And the disciples go back to what they knew. They were fishermen. So Peter says, I'm going fishing, okay? And they all get on the boat and they go fishing. They catch nothing. And anybody who's ever been fishing and caught nothing knows how frustrating that is. All right, so they're coming back in the shore, and there's this guy on the shore, and they don't recognize him. And in our translation here, it says children. He calls out to them and says children. Some translations say that Jesus called out and said friends. It's very formal sounding, but neither is incredibly accurate. The Greek version, if you look at the Greek, Jesus calls out and says boys. Boys. And you're going, why would they change that to children or friends? Well, the reason they did that was boys sounds very informal. It's like the ancient way of saying, hey, guys. Okay, so Jesus calls out and says, hey, guys. That's what he says in the Greek version. But this is what we call a translation battleground. Scholars argue over this. And a lot of scholars have said, wait a minute. Resurrected Christ is never informal with anybody. He would be very formal, okay? So he's going to say children or friends, right? Setting up this relationship of I am the leader to lead, right? He wouldn't say, hey, guys. But guys, in the Greek, it's clear. He says boys, okay? And he's calling out to them in an informal manner. And think about how you use that terminology of, hey, guys, when maybe you're meeting family, your fellow brothers or sisters. And who is Jesus greeting right now? His fellow brothers, the disciples that he spent all those years with. It makes sense. He calls out to them in this informal greeting. It sets up the tone for this whole gospel lesson. This isn't going to be formal. This is an informal meeting that is going to end with joy. All right? The next verse that really gets that people argue over, translators argue over, is where he says, you didn't catch any fish, did you? And we read it as, Jesus is again very formal, you did not catch any fish, did you? Because like he's going to teach them a lesson. But again, if you look in the Greek, it indicates to us that Jesus says this almost in a half-teasing manner, right? Almost a humorous, good-natured manner, right? He'd be like, you guys didn't catch any fish last night, did you? Yep, I figured that, right? Oh, how about, well, let's try throwing the net on the right side of the boat. Oh, look, you got all the fish now. Wow, right? That's how the Greek version reads. Okay, again, why do scholars argue over? Again, people struggle to think, could the resurrected Christ tease his disciples, have fun with them, be good-natured? But guys, think about in your family, and if you have siblings, what do brothers and sisters do with each other? We tease each other, okay, in a good, not a malicious manner, but a good-natured, fun. You guys are you're shaking your head, Jay, but you know you tease, okay? You did that probably your whole life. You're still probably doing it. Even here in a church family, we tease each other. It's an incredibly important part of building relationships in a family. Jesus is welcoming back his brothers, okay? He's not being formal. He's being incredibly informal. He's teasing them, okay? It's a good-natured, humorous moment, all right? It sets us up for the next scene, right, where Peter, when he realizes, they're like, oh my goodness, it's the Lord. And don't you think the fact that Jesus was informal is one of the reasons they recognize his voice, right? They're like, it's him, right? And Peter, in his joy, right, jumps off the boat. Now, when we read this, everybody's real serious. But guys, in the Greek version, it indicates that the disciples laugh, okay? Because think about it, it's Peter, impetuous, passionate, leap without looking Peter, who is so excited to see Jesus, right? They're only 100 yards from the shore. He can't even wait for the boat to land. He throws on his clothes and jumps off the boat. If we were on that boat, you would laugh too, right? Out of joy. This is a beautiful moment, right? Jesus is standing on the shore with his arms wide open, a smile on his face, laughter on his lips, and he's welcoming Peter back in, and the disciples are laughing too. That's what you lose in the translation, the laughter portion. Why is that laughter important? Well, that great Christian writer C.S. Lewis once said that the final stage of joy is laughter, right? When we reach the apex of joy, we laugh. Mark Twain, right, the famous humorist, would say, humans are the only animals that laugh and need to, okay? You know, think of how the crucifixion was so awful, right? The suffering of that moment, right? But now we're past that. Jesus beat it. And now's the time for this beautiful moment of joy and laughter, right? And Jesus is having fun with his disciples, and he's welcoming them back. Right? This is a chance for Peter, who has denied Jesus 3 times, to redeem himself and come back into the fold. This is an incredibly joyful moment, and there's a lot of laughter in it. The Greek indicates that we are laughing with joy with our family here. All right? We're putting all the puzzle pieces back together again. And because our translation leaves that out a little bit, it can be tough sometimes to infer that. Again, you get the message. You know what's going on, but you sometimes lack the humor of it. The teasing aspect of it, the joy, the immense amount of laughter and joy that goes into this moment. Think about how this story contrasts with the Last Supper, guys. And the Last Supper is a very formal supper, right? Dinner. Jesus is saying goodbye. The next step is death. There's nothing joyful about that moment, right? We're about to lose him. Contrast this with this scene. Jesus is making breakfast, the most informal meal of the day. We're at the morning, right? New day, new possibilities. We're at the beach, the most informal place in the world, right? We're laughing. There's a lot of joy here, right? Notice how those two scenes contrast with each other, okay? So for me, this scene has always been about joy, reconciliation, and laughter. There's great laughter here, okay? That incredible joy that you feel when you laugh, okay? Again, does it matter? Does it matter that sometimes we leave out these little emotional touches, these little human touches in our gospel readings? I think only you can really answer that. You know, for some of you, you can read these and you get that. You can infer that emotion from that. And you probably are also saying, well, why did they leave that stuff out? Maybe some of you like that there's laughter in this scene. Well, when translators 15 years ago, and they were putting this stuff together, they were always worried about that people would doubt the divinity of Jesus Christ. And so they worked very hard in the translations to make sure that you did not doubt. And so sometimes, they would scrape away, like we said, the toppings on the cheeseburger, anything that was very human, right? Because they wanted to make sure they emphasized only the divine aspects of Jesus. And in the process of doing that, taking out the laughter or the chuckling or the smiles, right? I think they've robbed us of our ability to connect with Jesus on a human level. That's one of the great privileges and opportunities of our faith, is that God became human and allowed us to relate to him on a truly human level, right? He came to earth and walked here, went through the same trials and tribulations as us, died like us, suffered like us, bled like us, right? He put his pants on just like us. And so sometimes when we take those little, human elements out of the Gospels, I think we're the poorer for it. I think we rob ourselves of a connection point there sometimes. And so I want you to think about how maybe we can look at these Gospels and really relate to Jesus on a human level. Think about how you picture Jesus in your mind's eye when you say the word Jesus Christ. For most of us, we picture him in a very divine manner, right, as he is in the transfiguration with the glory of God, right, as he's resurrected. And if we do think about him in a human manner, it's oftentimes when he suffers and dies on the cross or when he was born. But what if do we ever think about when he just smiled, when he laughed, when he chuckled? He did. He was human too, like us. Do we ever picture a Jesus that does that? I'll tell you, in my mind's eye, and I challenge you also to think about Jesus in this way, think about him also. Can you see him as a man who lived and laughed and loved like us? A man whose face is the face of mercy. The bigger the sinner, the warmer the welcome. A man who's standing on the beach in the early morning hours making breakfast for us and beckoning to us and saying, "Follow me." Can you see that man? Amen.